When we talk about climate change, we often mention energy and transport as being huge emitter of CO2. But did you know that food creates more emissions than all of the cars in the world combined? In fact, food and agriculture represent more than 20% of all the greenhouse gases emissions, and yet most climate investors are still completely ignoring this sector. So what are the real levers for climate impact? And can startups really fix some of those challenges? To talk about this topic, I'm joined by Lauri Reuter, the founding partner at Nordic FoodTech VC. Lauri is one of the few investors focused on transforming the food system from the ground up by investing in the invisible infrastructure that actually feeds the planet. In this episode, we're going beyond the usual food tech headlines and we will explore the critical gaps in the food system, how to spot the technologies that will reshape how we grow, produce, and consume food, and why relying on consumer appetite for sustainability is a losing strategy. You are listening to VCO2, the climate investing podcast. And before we start, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or to give us a follow and a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This really helps us grow. So thank you so much for that. We'll do it. And let's dive in. Lauri, welcome to the show. And I guess to start things off, could you draw a bit of a picture of the food industry for me?
Yeah, sure. So, if you think of climate and environment, we often focus a lot in energy and transportation as things where we need to put focus on. But food is a massive part of it. Um, I mean, 1/3 of all climate emissions come from food system as a whole. So it's huge. 70% of all fresh water is used on the planet to produce our food. And if you take a look at the planet from space, 40% of the land area is used for food production. So it's a massive part of what's going on the planet. And at the same time, it's changing a lot. Food has always been technology. Food has always changed. And now it just needs to change very fast in order to, maintain a healthy population of humans on a healthy planet. And, that climate change mentioned, it's hitting already food system very hard. So look at the cocoa price or price of coffee. They're skyrocketing now because of extreme weather conditions caused by the climate change already now impacting the cost of goods on the shelves. And at the same time, the way we produce our foods using animals is a sitting target for all kinds of next pandemics. Look at what's happening with eggs in the US. The prices are through the roof. It's because of a viral pandemia going on in the chickens and whole herds of chicken, it's been called, and obviously, increasing the price of eggs. So the food system we are living in is quite fragile. We're seeing some cracks of it already, especially now in the middle of geopolitical crisis following another one. And the supply chains are getting really, really, really brittle. So food kind of needs to change. And it's sort of a little bit contradicting to our everyday life where we kind of don't want food to change. So it's a fun system to work with. But I think if you want to run if you want to be a solid impact investor, you cannot neglect food. Or if you want to be an entrepreneur making really impact to climate and environment, food is a big part of that.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned the climate aspect, but something maybe I want you to go back to is the social aspect as well. Maybe you will correct me on the statistics, but I think we waste approximately a third of the food we produce. And I think, what is it, like 2 billion people are like don't have enough food on a daily basis. Is that correct?
Yes, we are wasting a lot of food. And we're wasting, so most of the food waste happens way before it's on your plate. So a lot of crops are wasted before they are even harvested through all kinds of, plant diseases or, again, extreme weather conditions that ruin the crop before you even harvest it. So it's partly in the nature of food. It's really easily perishable good. and it should be because we're also digesting it. It should perish. It should sort of, go away when you eat it. So we cannot entirely get rid of food waste ever, but we should reduce a lot of it because we're wasting massive amount of food that could be and should be edible. And at the same time, we already have this weird situation with diets that where we have already more overweight people on the planet than undernourished. So in a way you could think of it so that all the calories you put in that you don't need are also food waste. It's food that should not have been eaten and could have been eaten by someone who's not having enough food. So the way we distribute food that is already produced is also in a crazy misbalance on the planet.
And I think there are a lot of like challenges with that as well, because like it's less expensive to buy crappy food than it is to buy healthy food. Like for example, that's completely a broken system. But I mean, we'll not talk only about the what's broken there. I think I'd love to get into the origin story of your fund because obviously, as you said, like to be a great impact investors, it's very hard to neglect food because it's such a crucial topic. What is your investment thesis? Like, why did you decide to completely only focus on food as opposed to also having like a general thesis on energy and also a component of climate change?
So I think, in a way, we came first to food and then to starting a VC fund. So there is four original founders in this company, and we all approached food from very different angles. I'm coming more from the academic world. I was doing biotech research, sort of in the cross section of food and biotech, and I was so annoyed by all the great technologies that were just lying around in the research labs and not being put in use. And and another one of the partners that I then later came together with to start the fund was working in food industry, and he was so frustrated with the slow pace of food industry, their sort of incapability of building something radically new and fast. There was another one of the founders was working sort of a founder first kind of a personality, building food companies from scratch, one by one, and frustrated how non-scalable that was. And then there was the fourth person who came in who has experience in VC funds, and it was like, hey guys, maybe we should test if this VC vehicle would be the right thing to fix all those bottlenecks. So I jumped out of research, where I was sort of pushing innovation out from research context to the other side to pull it out. So the big notion at that time was that there needs to be a sector specific investor who knows what they're doing, who knows what they're dealing with when it comes to food tech, and start investing in those early stage companies, especially the ones that come out of research, and support them and get them going. And that will then maybe, provide the technologies and solutions for the food industry to also transform faster. So it was more that we were first dealing with food and the bottlenecks there, and then VC came as a potential tool to get things done.
And talking about this VC tool, how big is the opportunity in food tech? Because obviously, I would assume that you guys didn't just go and say, "Hey, like we're gonna do something with food," but like obviously you have to have an economic model that works for a VC firm to sustain and be able to invest in companies. So, like, how big is the opportunity according to you in food tech?
If you consider food industry or food business as the size of the opportunity, it is the biggest industry on the planet. So it is massive, but it's also obviously very different kind of industry than many of the tech industries in the way it operates. So it's a very different kind of a beast, I would say. But maybe I would claim that it's a planet-size opportunity. If we want to keep on living on the planet, there is just no other way than fixing the food system. So that's the size of our addressable market. Receiving end it's the mankind size of a market. Everybody eats. Everybody has to eat several times of the day.
No, for sure, and I think it's very interesting because it's one of those markets where like the TAM is not necessarily that important. argue, or at least like not in the earlier stages, because obviously there is demand for a new food system, right?
And that's, sometimes you see those early pitch decks where you have the Sams and Tams and the total market size, and I really don't care. I mean, when you're dealing with food, it's quite often big enough to justify having a company and investment in it.
You mentioned that you were in the lab before, and that you wanted to push out technologies to market. Uh, when we think about the food startups that we've seen in the past, one thing that comes to mind is the delivery apps, alternative proteins. Like this were the famous big names. Uh, I think I'm not on the right track for like a food tech company. They're like, what exactly is a food tech company according to you? What are the type of projects that qualifies as food tech and the technology that you want to see there?
So yeah, I mean, there was there was this great wave of food tech companies popping up in sort of media and our common knowledge in 21, 22, 23, especially in COVID times. The food delivery was talked about a lot. Also, there was a lot of vertical farming companies and plant-based XYZ, um, which were kind of called the alternative proteins, but alternative proteins are way bigger than that. And and a lot of consumer goods were produced by startups and sort of innovated by startups. But we decided to, from the beginning, to stay away from many of those. Sort of, for us, food tech is any technology that solves a problem at some point in the food supply chain. And quite often it's industry, it's the agri industry, it's even the farmer who we solve those problems for. It's not often the consumer. So we're trying to stay away from consumer products, consumer brands, is that's a very, very different kind of game. That's not really the tech thing for us. Many of the companies we work with are ingredient providers, ingredient developers, or technology developers that you won't really end up seeing on the supermarket shelves or advertised towards consumers. But it really ranges from satellites to sensors that you put in the field to circular fertilizers to fish farming technologies. Then we have a bunch of sort of biotech companies creating all kinds of new protein ingredients, fat ingredients, flavors, colors, um, all the way to functional ingredients that may enable us to get our bioavailable iron from completely new kinds of sources. So you actually do get kind of into the food and into human, but not really as a consumer product.
Yeah, and why do you think that is all of the VC firm focused first on the consumer-facing food tech? I mean, obviously, can mention a few brands, but like I'm thinking about La Vie, I'm thinking about Hera Foods, I'm thinking about like all of these alternative proteins company that we all know because they for some of us are part of our daily routine of like our food routine. For example, my girlfriend is a vegetarian, so obviously like these are products that we have at home. But like, why do you think so many investors focus on that space as opposed to like the maybe bigger opportunity that we have on the supply chain side?
I think it might have something to do that. So if you come to food from different perspective, you come from being already an investor, looking for opportunities that you understand, and then entering food. That end product is kind of easy to understand. It's easy to understand a company that makes a product and creates a brand for it and sells it to the consumer, right? The food system, the whole supply chain is much more complicated. It's very complex. So you kind of need to come from a different angle to understand that game in the background. And well, consumer products are kind of on the surface level easy to understand for any one of us. I mean, we all eat and we all have a very close relationship to the stuff we eat. So it's also easy to get excited about that kind of products. But we've been in this game long enough to have learned that putting a consumer product on the market is extremely demanding. It's expensive. It takes a lot of capital to do. It's also risky, and there's a lot of logistics involved in that. All are things that the existing food companies have in place. So they are actually very, very good at that. They are very good at developing a new recipe and a new product, a new brand for it, and putting it, distributing it to the consumers. So we rather let them do that, or let some other investors invest in those consumer products, maybe investors who know brands very well. We know the tech part and the industry part very well, so we're focusing on that part. Not saying it's easy, but it's something we think we understand better.
I guess it was important for me to understand in the context of the discussion we have today, like your investment thesis, because that will probably direct a bit of the conversation we'll have. But another topic that you've mentioned before this episode, when I asked you, like, what do you want to talk about? You said, how do we invest in a system where there is no appetite for sustainability? And I like the way you played with the words there. But, you know, I guess, do we actually need to change? Like, is there a strong incentive for either consumer-facing companies or even like supply chain companies in the food system to actually change? Is there enough of a value proposition for them to change today?
Yeah, I mean that's a very, very good and very big question. We all know that climate change is sort of tragedy of the commons. We all know it's a serious issue, but it seems that no one actor has the incentives and motivation to actually do anything about it. As end consumers, if we're being asked, we say that we care about the environment and climate and we make smart decisions. But then if you see what kind of decisions we make in the supermarket or restaurant or in our food ordering app, yeah, and sustainability plays absolutely no role. It's all about taste, convenience, price, not about environment. And obviously, the food industry is serving the customer, so they don't have any big pressure to change. So the way we look at companies is that you must be building a more sustainable food system. That's table stakes. But there also needs to be strong economic drivers for that change to happen. So not only your product needs to be better for the environment and more resource efficient, but it also needs to be cheaper, or it needs to provide some value for the industry to take it up, because for them the cost of switching an ingredient is quite a big. So you don't do it if there is no additional value to it.
And how do we do that?
That's a. I mean, if you look at few companies that, I mean, one interesting example, not our portfolio company, but sort of around here, is Onego Bio. They make egg albumin, so effectively the egg white, using a biotech process. So it is way more sustainable. It's much more sustainable for climate and environment. It's obviously way more ethical. There is no chickens involved there at all. It's also safer because you avoid the whole bird flu thing. But the sales point, the value proposition for the industry is that the price is stable. It's not fluctuating. So you have predictable price for your product because it comes from fermentation process, and that's why it sells.
And so it doesn't have to be cheaper necessarily. It has to have a value proposition, right?
Yeah, not necessarily cheaper, and stability is something that the food industry appreciates a lot.
For sure, because they have such a large volume and they need to produce throughout the year. So obviously, if they can be stable in their price, they can manage their margin much better.
Another
Um,
another example there is one of our companies. They make a chocolate alternative, or cocoa alternative.
is that Planet A?
And no, that's Endless Food.
Okay, so a
So
competitor then.
yeah, so Endless Food, I think where they're playing it smart. If you go to Denmark and go to any 7-Eleven there and buy what looks like a chocolate cookie, it doesn't contain any chocolate. It's 100% the cocoa ingredient. They call it thick from Endless Food, and it's a big thing for 7-Elevens. They cut their emissions and their environmental footprint a lot, and they get away from the crazy price fluctuation of cacao. But they're not even communicating it to their customers. When you go there and you buy the cookie, it doesn't say dark chocolate cookie. It just says dark cookie, but it tastes like chocolate cookie. So in a way, there is no consumer pull for that, but it's just an important thing for the company, for the industry to replace the ingredient. That's where you can really move things.
Yeah, and I like it because if they were to play another way around, which is like just trying to sell these tablets of chocolate, of like kind of, fake chocolate or alternative chocolate, I don't know how you want to call it. I think that would be maybe a bit harder because you have to convince customers. But by putting it into existing products, and I don't know if they should say it though, but I think that's debatable
I mean,
on an ethical point.
they will need to claim it in the ingredient list, that's for sure. But it's not the main value proposition that is sort of on your face. It's not the reason to buy it. The reason to buy is that you're buying a great product that you want to have. It just happens to be made of more sustainable ingredients. And you're right. I mean, we're coming back to food being such an important part of our identity and our emotions. That's why replacing things like coffee or chocolate is extremely difficult. Or meat has there's there's a lot of loaded values to meat. So replacing meat is extremely difficult, and sort of it's easier to replace it in places where we don't even realize it's replaced.
100%. And, I'm in the process of transitioning a bit away from it as well, obviously, because my girlfriend is vegetarian. So she's also, helping me out with that. But I agree with you, it's extremely hard because there's such a cultural value around like some of these products. I mean, the French cuisine obviously is quite famous for having a lot of like meat product in them. And so, kind of transitioning away from that not only is like a desire from a climate and potentially ethic perspective, but it's very hard from a cultural perspective because you know that you will sit at tables where like the main meal and the main dish is like has meat in it. So obviously that makes it very much harder. But going back to that biotech company that you mentioned, I wonder like, does that fly with customers? Because if you tell me tomorrow I'm gonna eat fake white egg, like, I'm not sure I would buy it. Obviously, they sell it to industry also, it's a bit different, but, like, does that fly with customer?
So I mean, especially the people who have egg allergy know that eggs are used in all kinds of foods for its functional properties, and roughly one third of all eggs are actually used as industrial ingredients. So it is a white powder that the bakers will put into the product. They're not cracking eggs there. So it will there the this albumin produced through biotech will be exactly the same kind of a white powder. So the consumers in the labeling it says egg white. It doesn't really change anything. It's effectively it is the same molecule. It is the same stuff that goes in your food. It's just produced in a different way. In a bit similar way, we have this one of my favorite companies in our portfolio called Ebodia. They have engineered yeast to make these aroma compounds. So it's the aroma that makes up the smell of let's say rosemary or lavender or hops. And they produce those through fermentation and make this product called yops. So it's a liquid that you can just add a couple of drops in your non-alcoholic beer to get the hop flavor to it. So you can make a non-alcoholic IPA without using crazy amounts of hops that are getting very, very expensive. And now, by the way, a very thirsty crop, so consuming a lot of fresh water. So now the end product has the same aroma compounds, chemically the same compound, just made by a yeast, which is anyway in your beer, instead of growing a hop plant. So does the consumer care they get a great product that tastes great without being ridiculously expensive? I mean, the label says yeast derived natural aroma. It doesn't need to claim that, by the way, this beer is made by fake hops.
When we were talking about no appetite for sustainability, I think that's maybe the difference between the industry part of it versus the consumer part of it. Because if a consumer was to make that decision, that would be maybe harder. But the industry really cares about, as you said, costs, risks, all of those things that maybe biotech and also alternative to the current food system can help and do. But I'm curious for yourself. So obviously you have this, biotech background. Uh, how do you build conviction into this technology? I'm pretty sure you get excited by all of the technology you see, right? Like, how do you build conviction in this type of companies?
And that's obviously it helps me that I have some understanding in those technological tools, especially when it comes to biotech companies. And obviously, we've learned over the past 5 years a lot about all kinds of other technologies too. But a big help and big support for us is that we have a bunch of industry investors in our fund, which means we have this close collaboration with people who work day in day out in the food industry, and they help us to understand the right problems to solve. And that's maybe even more important than uh, getting right away to the solutions. It's important to know which are the relevant problems to solve, and that helps us a lot in building conviction in cases, and knowing sort of getting these maybe calling it an acquired intuition, knowing that when you see something, knowing that this might sound a bit quirky, a bit strange, a bit niche, but it's really important for the industry. Like we have one company making a natural red color. So the whole business of the whole company is to make red color for food. And that might sound like a really, really niche thing, but red color is a huge thing in food. It's by far a big enough market to justify building a new company. And the industry is really struggling at the moment with the current colors. So it helps to know the industry, and that has been really important for us.
I think that's very interesting because I want to dive a little bit deeper in that topic, which is like, what are the problems that this LP, which are also the industrial that are behind your fund, have? Like, what are those problems that they want to solve? If you have maybe a short list of like the most important problems of what they want to solve, because as you said, I think it's very important for funders sometimes to understand, solve for a problem first and then find a solution to it, as opposed to the other way around, right?
Well, I mean, first of all, food system is absolutely massive. It's very, very complicated area, and there's so many things to it. It would be impossible to just drop all the problems here. Um, but maybe sort of starting from upstream. I mean, one sort of obvious, clear problem that the whole food primary production is suffering and will be suffering in the coming years is where do we get our fertilizers? I mean, right now, just producing the nitrogen fertilizers with the 100-year-old process that we're doing now makes us fully dependent on fossil energy, on natural gas, which is not sustainable at all. Not to mention the geopolitics of it, and it's a massive source of greenhouse emissions. Phosphorus is another thing. I mean, phosphorus is not something we can make; it's an element. There is only so much of it on this planet, and there's only so many places where we can mine it, and we're running out. So how do you find ways to use less, circulate, smarter ways of doing things? The industry knows that we need to get rid of many kinds of chemical pesticides in agriculture. How do we? And we need crop protection. We need to protect our crops from all kinds of bugs eating it and diseases attacking it. So how do we do that without the chemistry that we have been relying on for the past almost 100 years? So, I mean, details like that. The food industry in general, there's bunch of ingredients that go into pretty much all the foods that we are now really struggling to find some ways to replace those. Synthetic red colors, for example, in US being banned right now, you need to find another way to make food look attractive, because we consumers really want our food to look great. Um, or finding, for example, replacements for tropical oils. We all know palm oil is not great, but it's also very, very cheap to produce. So how do you change that? We all know we want chocolate. We love it, but it's one of the crops where the climate change is hitting the hardest. So how do we find ways to maybe use some alternatives in some places where it makes a lot of sense? So there's these very, very detailed, specific things that need to be solved. And that would be my message to all those founders out there. I mean, don't come to food investors and say that you're going to disrupt the food industry. you've got to be a bit more specific. I mean, what is the exact problem that you're solving? And if it's something very niche, explain that. Sometimes you even need to explain that to the investors why this specific thing is a problem. And that's the way to go. Start on specifics.
You know what I find scary though is that all of the problems you mentioned, they are emerging because like we will miss the resource at some point to use them. Like we are running out of so many ingredients, for example. That is scary because it makes me think that humanity is not able to predict a bit ahead and also see what's coming in the future. It feels like we're trying to, fix those quick fires everywhere and trying to make sure that we don't run out of certain ingredients. And it's like, can't we just like see a bit further away and realize that, you know, using animals as a production system for food is not the most efficient way, for example. And so we need to completely change that, right?
I mean, animal production in this scale we're using it now. Just out of curiosity, if you take all the birds on the planet, like all the birds on this planet, and put them in one big pile, 70% of that pile is chicken. I mean, this scale is just crazy. So I would like to think of animal production a bit like fossil fuels. If you take long enough time perspective, we have been using them actually for a very short period of time, and we will sort of cut it down, hopefully in a very short period of time. It's kind of like a really sharp peak on the timeline, and the same is with animal farming as we know it. But like you said, we should look far in the future, and especially with food, because food has changed a lot from like inventing farming 10,000 years ago to the whole green revolution, changing everything in food in those couple of decades in 50s and 60s. Then we thought, at that time that, we will not be able to feed all the people on the planet. We run out of food. There is these great famines. But we invented technology and we avoided that bullet. So the same thing will happen now. It seems somewhat morbid. It seems dark if you look at the immediate future, but we will invent our way out of this. I'm absolutely certain about it.
And we need to
We
definitely.
need to.
But
There's just no other way.
I guess I want to transition to another section, which is more about your VC hat. Let's remove that biotech hat for a second. Um, I guess for me, it's important to understand, how do you approach investing? One thing that comes to mind right away is like all of the projects that you've mentioned so far. They seems to be deep tech startups. It feels like today is a lot of VCs are looking for the quick win with AI, apps and whatever. Like, how do you support the startups when the rest of the world is hungry? And sorry for playing with the world there, but when the rest of the world is hungry for quick wins and you're trying to play the very long game of the food industry.
It's a balancing act. Um, we believe that the the real solutions, the best solution, the concrete ways to change the food system, they come from scientific discovery and engineering. There is no way around it. There is no quick fixes. There is no AI that would just change everything in food. Um, so that's the source of good stuff to us. So most of our companies that we have invested are actually research spin-ups. They are deep tech in very, very sort of very meaning of the word. Now, you also need to be mindful that with a 10-year VC fund, you need to be developing companies that can get to market and make an exit in relatively short period of time. So in that sense, for example, cultivated meat, so meat grown out of animal cells, it's a fantastical idea. And it will maybe one day change the way we think of meat and food. But it will still take decades before it's a commonplace thing. So we would not have, and we will not invest in it from a 10-year VC fund. We need to see companies that have, even if they are very, very early and you're starting from a university, we need to see that there is a concrete problem in the food industry now that these guys will be able to solve in a matter of few years. to make their case and prove their market, and then make it a good VC case.
And how do you where do you stand right now? Because you've been running the fund for what, 5 years now, I think, if I'm correct. Where do you stand? Do you see a potential trajectory for exiting a lot of these companies that you've invested in so far? Is that realistic? 5 years down the line, do you think that story holds true?
Well, so we started the first fund in 2020. Actually, 5 years ago today, when we are
Oh
recording
wow!
this. So it's
Happy
our
birthday!
anniversary today. We made investments in 18 companies. That's the full portfolio. And considering the rough past couple of years for startups, all of our companies are still alive and they're doing well. So that's the first good thing. We see a trajectory for the portfolio to make excellent returns, and we see trajectories for all of these companies to make great exits in the next 5 years. That said, we haven't made any exits yet. But then again, it's less than 5 years from the first investment, so we're still not worried about that. That time will come.
Definitely. One last topic before we jump into the last section of this episode, but obviously you're based in the Nordics. The Nordics has a reputation of being very sustainable and being good at innovation. What's your take there? Do you see a lot of great food innovation projects in the Nordics specifically as compared to the rest of Europe? Or
Yeah, I mean, Nordics is very, very peculiar place to be in. I mean, I'm a Finn, so it's sort of home turf for us. We're based partly in Finland, partly in Denmark, so it's our home turf anyway. But Nordics, there is a lot of really, really good research, the sort of heritage, legacy research from, let's say, forestry industry in Finland, which actually, if you think of companies like Enifer, Solar Foods, or Onego Bio, they kind of all come from that legacy forestry research, but that is applied now in food tech. There's also the whole Nokia legacy that has given, sort of fertile ground for a lot of innovation in that sort of technology. Sweden has absolutely fantastic agricultural research. SOU is one of the top universities or research institutions in food and agriculture. A lot of good pharma research that sort of gives the seeds for future innovation. Denmark has that whole Novo Nordisk, Nozymes ecosystem that builds fantastic capabilities in biotech and applying that in food. I mean, there is no such technology as food tech. Like I said, for us, food tech is any kinds of technology that is applied in food. Another thing that we have is sort of, I'd say, scarcity. I mean, think of living in Finland, it's not really the best place for agriculture or any kinds of food production. So we have had to be innovative around it and use the best possible technology for all our history. So it's a good place to also develop the next technologies for the next centuries.
yeah, I love that.
Very supportive sort of governmental setup. I mean, it's a good place to grow a startup and get also soft funding and governmental support for it.
Which is very important for these deep tech companies. But look, we're getting towards the end of this episode. We have one last section, which is called the fire questions. These are questions that you have to answer in one sentence maximum. We'll try to cover approximately 10 of them in the next 5 minutes. Are you ready for that?
Oof, as ready as it gets.
Great. What are the 3 things you look for in an early stage food tech company?
Protectable technology, founders that have the capability to develop that tech and build a company, and integrity, the trustworthiness, and the go and get it done attitude. No, the sort of Nordic no bullshit attitude.
I love that. You mentioned the founders. What are the 3 best attributes to a great founder?
I think those are the integrity, right? The same thing. There you go. Technological capability. You need to be really smart at something and then get it done. And hunger.
Yeah, I love that, which is the right word to put for this episode. What's one area of food tech that's completely overhyped right now?
GLP-1 companion products. I think many are trying to piggyback on the GLP-1 hype. Uh, yeah, GLP companion foods, as in healthy food. I think there's a lot more hype there right at the moment.
Very interesting. What's an underrated innovation on the other side?
Underrated. I think there is a lot of these sort of technical ingredients that will go into food that are not that sexy that you would talk about them in a dinner table, but are sort of high impact, high value ingredients that you can produce in a smarter way. And oh yeah, fertilizers. Hell yeah, fertilizers. Not sexy at all. Super important.
Yeah, I love that. What's the most surprising thing you've learned since you became an investor because you were a scientist and biotech engineer before?
Yeah, I think for me, I was and still am a huge believer in technology. But I think the biggest learning for me was that after you have invented something, there are still so many ways to mess it up. You need to build a company, and there's many ways that can fail before you actually change the world.
Super interesting. Is impact measurable for food tech VC or is it still a bit fuzzy?
I think it's measurable, but you cannot reduce everything to carbon equivalence. You need to look at impact a bit more diversely, because it's also biodiversity, it's also water consumption, it's also food security, it's also health. So it's measurable, but you cannot reduce it to one number.
Very interesting. If you were not a VC, what role would you play in the environmental transition?
I feel very deeply about conservation of the last remaining old forests. I don't know. I would probably tie myself up into old trees and somehow work for forest conservation.
Maybe something for retirement. Who knows?
Maybe.
What's the biggest barrier to accelerating food tech?
I think still it's still I think there's two. There is the sort of very tight path dependencies and resistance to change in the existing food industry and agriculture. And the second is still, it's underfunded. You compare it to any other climate or environmental, investments or any actions towards, climate resilience, food tech is still underfunded.
Yeah, definitely. Compared to energy, for example, it's crazy. The difference is massive. What are the three most important things to be a successful impact VC? And we'll consider that you're already successful with 18 companies that haven't gone bankrupt for 5 years. I think that's success already.
I would say first, you need to understand the industry. Sure, impact is absolutely, yeah, everybody should go for that. We need that. There shouldn't be investing without, having that impact angle. But you need to understand the industry you're trying to change to solve the real problems. And second, I think you should really pay attention to the drivers of that impact. It's not enough to make a product that has, let's say, smaller environmental footprint if nobody wants it, because that means you multiply it with a zero. So you need to make sure there's drivers for that impact. And third, I think it's still human business. So that integrity and that you know being a human, being a good human to other good humans trying to build good things.
I like that. And I think I like the idea of the time zero that you mentioned because I had a Benedict from Planet A Ventures on the podcast, and we talked about LCA for like 45 minutes. And one thing in LCA is obviously like if you don't scale your company, it's almost worthless. You can have the best, like let's call it impact economics at a small scale, but if you don't scale at all, then the impact is ridiculous. Well, one last question for you today. You are in the middle of fundraising. What's one advice for someone trying to raise a fund right now, a VC fund right now?
Wait for a couple of months, or alternatively, we start very early. It's not the greatest time to raise a VC fund, especially if you're doing an impact fund or really impact focused. I mean, that's kind of off the table. There was a good friend at a sort of a sovereign wealth fund who said that they are still doing ESG, It's just that those letters stand for different things now. It's energy, security, and guns. So it's tough times. Start early and make sure you have enough time to raise your fund.
Yeah, or start in 2020 or 2021.
But do it. Do it. I mean, I still think this VC is one of the most impactful tools. It's not the only tool to create a better world and a better food system, but it's one of those very impactful tools. So we need more impact investors in this world.
If people want to reach out to you after this episode because they want to submit a project, they want to co-invest with you, where can they find you online?
Website NFT, as in food, Nordic FoodTech VC, NFT.vc. That's where we are.
Love that. And one last question for you today. Who's the next person that should be in your seat, a climate partner at a VC firm?
Hampus and Pale Blue Dot, they are fantastic. And they're not only fantastic doing impact investing, but also sharing. They're running this drop conference in southern Sweden every year and sharing the love and insights with the whole community. I really love it. Hampus is one of the nicest people to have a chat with.
Love that. I had the chance to talk with Heidi, but I'm definitely happy to talk
Also
with her
great.
co-founders. Well, listeners, if you like this episode and if you like the show, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or give us a 5-star review and a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thank you so much, Lauri.
Thank you, though.